Step away from the Mercedes, now. Drop the keys and show me proof of status.
This is my car. You have no reasonable suspicion. Identify yourself properly right now.
You're loitering in a high-value lot and refusing a lawful order. Turn around or you're going in cuffs.
Touch me and you'll be arresting a DOJ
This isn't a
senior
stop, it's a
advisor
law.
Agent Derek Thorne had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE, specifically within enforcement and removal operations for 9 years, when he made the decision that would implode his life and cost the federal government a record-breaking $6.5 million settlement. At 34 years old, Thorne was a man who walked with the heavy, confident stride of someone who believed his authority was absolute. He had built a reputation in the Northern Virginia field office as a producer, an agent who brought in numbers who didn't get bogged down in the gray areas of bureaucracy, and who prided himself on what he called his gut instinct. But that instinct was about to lead him into a catastrophic collision with a force he wasn't capable of comprehending. Before we dive into the details of this Sunday morning disaster, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that no citizen should be targeted based on their appearance, hit that subscribe button. We bring these stories to light because accountability only happens when the public is watching. It was a crisp Sunday morning in late October in Arlington, Virginia. The leaves were turning deep shades of amber and crimson, framing the historic St. Jude's Episcopal Church in a picture of suburban tranquility. This area just across the Potomac from Washington, D.C., is the seat of power for the nation's capital. It is a neighborhood of diplomats, senators, lobbyists, and high-ranking career officials who value privacy and decorum above all else. The church parking lot was filled with luxury sedans and SUVs, the quiet humming of engines the only sound as the 11 a.m. service concluded. Dr. Elena Vance had been a member of St. Jude's for over 20 years. At 56 years old, she was a pillar of the community, a woman whose presence commanded respect not through volume, but through a quiet, unshakable dignity. Dr. Vance was currently serving as a senior advisor on civil rights for the Department of Justice, a role she had ascended to after 3 decades of service as a federal prosecutor and a constitutional law scholar. She was the woman the Attorney General called when complex interpretations of liberty and security were on the line. She had drafted policy for 3 different administrations. Her colleagues knew her as a brilliant legal mind with a steel-trap memory and a low tolerance for incompetence. On this particular Sunday, Dr. Vance was not thinking about federal statutes or civil rights litigation. She was thinking about the sermon she had just heard and the brunch she was planning to attend with her husband, who was away on business but due back that evening. She walked toward her vehicle, a pristine silver Mercedes-Benz S-Class, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. She wore a tailored navy blue dress suit, a string of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, and carried a leather briefcase that contained unclassified but sensitive briefs she planned to review later. She looked like exactly what she was, a successful, sophisticated woman of stature. But Derek Thorne, sitting in his unmarked government SUV 3 streets over, was not looking for stature. He was looking for a target. He was technically off the clock, but Thorne was the type of agent who never truly turned off. He was logged into the dispatch frequencies, scanning for opportunities. He had been reprimanded twice in the last 3 years for aggressive stops that bordered on harassment, but his union representative had managed to get the disciplinary actions reduced to verbal counseling. His supervisors noted in his file that Thorne had difficulty separating lawful behavior from his personal biases, a polite way of saying he saw crimes where there were none, particularly when the subjects were people of color. Thorne was 34, young enough to still have ambition, but old enough to have grown cynical. He believed the system was too soft. He believed that people who didn't belong in certain neighborhoods were usually up to something. So when a call came over the local police frequency, a low-priority report of a suspicious individual loitering in the church lot, Thorne didn't wait for the local police to handle it. He heard the description, and his gut told him this was his jurisdiction. He turned the ignition through the SUV into gear and sped toward St. Jude's, convinced he was about to make a bust that would remind his superiors just how valuable he was. To understand why Agent Thorne was speeding toward a church parking lot on a Sunday, we have to look at the source of the call. Martha Reynolds, a 52-year-old resident who lived in the manicured townhomes adjacent to the church, was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's character. Martha was the type of person who kept a log of license plates she didn't recognize. She monitored the comings and goings of delivery trucks with the intensity of a border guard. And on this morning, from her second-story window, she saw Dr. Elena Vance standing by the silver Mercedes. Vance had paused at her car door to check a text message on her phone. She stood there for perhaps 2 minutes enjoying the autumn sun on her face. To Martha Reynolds, this was not a woman checking a text. This was a suspicious character casing a vehicle. In Martha's worldview, a black woman standing alone next to a $100,000 car in this specific zip code didn't compute as ownership. It computed as theft, or worse. Martha didn't see a DOJ advisor. She saw a threat to her property values. She picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency line, her voice trembling with manufactured anxiety. "Yes, I need to report a suspicious person at St. Jude's Church," Martha told the dispatcher. "There's a woman African-American loitering by the luxury cars. She's been there for a long time. She's looking into windows. I think she might be trying to break in, or maybe she's waiting for a drug deal. It looks like... well, she doesn't look like she lives here." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. Is she holding a weapon? Is she acting aggressively? "No," Martha admitted. "But she's just standing there, menacingly. And she's definitely not a member. I know everyone at that church." This was a lie. The church had over 500 members, and Dr. Vance had attended longer than Martha had lived in the neighborhood. But the seed was planted. The call went out as a suspicious person/potential auto theft in progress. Agent Thorne heard the dispatch, and his mind immediately filled in the blanks. Auto theft ring, undocumented criminals, drug money. In his 9 years at ICE, Thorne had developed a tunnel vision that filtered the world through the lens of immigration enforcement. He assumed that any crime involving a person of color in an affluent area was likely tied to a network he could dismantle. He didn't care that auto theft was a local police matter. He wanted the glory. He wanted the collar. He arrived at the church lot at 11:14 a.m., pulling his SUV in at a sharp angle to block the exit lane, effectively trapping anyone trying to leave the row where Dr. Vance was parked. He spotted her immediately. She was just opening the door to the Mercedes. In Thorne's mind, he had caught her in the act. He didn't see the tailored suit or the pearls. He saw a suspect entering a high-value vehicle. Thorne slammed his door shut and marched toward her, his hand resting instinctively near the holster on his hip. He didn't have his tactical vest on, just a windbreaker with Police Ice emblazoned on the back in small letters, and his badge hanging from a chain around his neck. He didn't announce himself. He didn't observe. He simply attacked. "Hey, you step away from the vehicle," Thorne bellowed, his voice echoing off the brick walls of the church. Dr. Vance froze. She looked up, startled, phone in one hand, car keys in the other. She saw a white man in jeans and a windbreaker storming toward her with aggression radiating from him like heat. She didn't immediately recognize him as law enforcement. She saw a threat. "Excuse me," Dr. Vance said, her voice calm but firm. "Can I help you?" "I said step away from the car, drop the keys. Now." Thorne was within 10 feet of her, closing the distance rapidly. "I am not dropping my keys," Vance replied, her demeanor shifting from startled to authoritative. "This is my vehicle. Who are you?" "Federal agent. And I'm asking the questions. Whose car is this? How did you get the keys?" Thorne stopped 3 feet from her, invading her personal space, using his physical size to intimidate. Dr. Vance took a half step back, not out of fear, but to maintain a defensive tactical distance, a habit from her years working alongside federal marshals. "I am Dr. Elena Vance. This is my vehicle. I have just finished attending services. If you are a federal agent, you are behaving in a highly irregular manner. Identify yourself properly." Thorne sneered. "I don't need to show you anything until you prove you belong here. We've had reports of theft rings in this area. You fit the description. Let's see some ID, proof of citizenship. Now." The demand for proof of citizenship hung in the crisp autumn air, a blatant, ugly reveal of exactly where Agent Thorne's mind was. He wasn't investigating a car theft anymore. He was profiling. He looked at a 56-year-old black woman in a bespoke suit and decided she must be a foreign national involved in criminal enterprise. Dr. Vance stared at him, her expression hardening into the look that had withered defense attorneys for decades. "Officer," she began, deliberately refusing to use his preferred title, "you are demanding proof of citizenship from a U.S. citizen standing in a church parking lot. On what reasonable suspicion? Do you have probable cause to believe an immigration violation has occurred?" Thorne bristled. He wasn't used to suspects knowing the vocabulary. He wasn't used to them looking him in the eye. "I have a witness report of suspicious activity. You're loitering. You're in possession of a high-value vehicle that I doubt you can explain. And now you're being combative. That gives me all the suspicion I need. ID. Now. Or you're going in cuffs." "I am not being combative. I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights," Vance said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly quiet. "I am a Department of Justice senior advisor. I have worked for the federal government for 30 years. If you touch me, if you continue this harassment, you will be violating federal law." Thorne laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Department of Justice, right? And I'm the director of the CIA. You think I haven't heard that one before? You people always have a story. I know the law. I work for the government. It's always a cover." "You people," Vance repeated. "Careful, Agent. You are digging a hole you will not be able to climb out of." "I'm done talking," Thorne snapped. "You're refusing to identify yourself. You're refusing a lawful order. Turn around." "I will identify myself," Vance said, reaching slowly toward her purse, which was resting on the hood of the car. "I am going to retrieve my credentials. Do not mistake this for a weapon." "Slowly," Thorne yelled, his hand tightening on his hip. Vance opened her purse with deliberate, steady movements. She bypassed her driver's license and went straight for the leather bifold wallet that held her DOJ commission. It was distinct, heavy, with a gold-embossed seal and a holographic federal ID card that granted her access to the highest levels of government buildings, including the White House. She flipped it open and held it up eye level with Thorne. "Department of Justice, Senior Advisor Elena Vance, badge number 004-9, 2-Alpha. Read it. Agent." Thorne looked at the badge. He saw the seal. He saw the photo. But his brain, poisoned by years of unchecked bias and an adrenaline loop he couldn't break, refused to process the information. He had already decided she was a criminal. Therefore, the badge could not be real. "Nice prop," Thorne said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Where did you get it? The same guy who sold you the fake papers for the car. That's a high-quality forgery. I'll give you that. But it's federal property fraud. That's a felony." Dr. Vance lowered the badge, her eyes widening in genuine disbelief. "You cannot be serious. You are looking at a legitimate federal credential and calling it a fake officer. Call your supervisor. Call the DOJ switchboard. Verify this right now." "I don't need to call anyone to know a scam when I see one." Thorne stepped forward, grabbing Dr. Vance's wrist. "You're under arrest for impersonating a federal officer, resisting arrest, and suspected auto theft." The physical contact was the crossing of the Rubicon. Dr. Vance did not pull away. She knew that any physical resistance would be used to justify violence. She went rigid. "You are making a mistake that will end your career," she stated, her voice projecting so that the people now exiting the church could hear. "I am a federal official. You are assaulting me." The scene in the parking lot had shifted from a quiet misunderstanding to a public spectacle. The 11 o'clock a.m. service had fully let out, and dozens of parishioners, lawyers, doctors, civil servants were streaming toward their cars. They saw a man in a windbreaker twisting the arm of one of their most respected community members. "Hey, what are you doing?" a male voice called out. It was Franklin Miller, a retired judge who had known Elena Vance for 15 years. "That is Elena Vance. Let go of her." Thorne whipped his head around his face, red with exertion and anger. "Back off, federal agent. This is an active arrest." "She is a DOJ advisor," Miller shouted, stepping closer but keeping his hands visible. "I know her. You are making a massive error. Son, she's a fraud," Thorne yelled back, spinning Vance around to force her against the side of her Mercedes. "She presented false credentials. Back away, or you'll be charged with obstruction." Dr. Vance's face was pressed against the cold metal of her car. She felt the humiliating twist of her arm behind her back. The pain was sharp, aggravating an old shoulder injury, but she refused to cry out. She focused her mind. She needed to survive the next 10 minutes. "I am complying," Vance said loudly, clearly for the witnesses. "I am offering no resistance. This officer is using excessive force on a compliant subject. My name is Elena Vance. I am a DOJ advisor. Please record this." Phones were already out. 3 teenagers standing near the church steps were streaming live. Judge Miller was recording. A woman in the front row was on the phone with 911. 911, what is your emergency? "There is a rogue officer attacking a woman at St. Jude's Church. He claims to be federal. He is hurting her. We need police now." Thorne ignored the crowd. He was locked in. He pulled his handcuffs from his belt. He didn't use the standard technique. He was rough, ratcheting the metal cuffs down hard on Dr. Vance's wrists, pinching the skin. "Stop moving," he barked, though she hadn't moved an inch. "The cuffs are too tight," Vance said calmly. "You are cutting off circulation. That is a policy violation." "Stop resisting and they won't hurt," Thorne retorted. He patted her down his hands, moving clumsily over her tailored suit. He grabbed the DOJ credentials from her hand and shoved them into his own pocket. "Evidence," he muttered. He grabbed her by the upper arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "Let's go." "My car," Vance said. "You cannot leave my vehicle unsecured." "It'll be impounded as evidence of the theft ring," Thorne said. "Move." He marched her across the parking lot toward his SUV. The crowd parted, a sea of shocked faces. People were shouting, "Shame on you!" and "Let her go." Thorne felt like a hero surrounded by a hostile mob. He convinced himself that these people were duped, that he was the only one who saw the truth. He was the thin blue line protecting them from their own naivety. He shoved Dr. Vance into the back seat of the government SUV. The cage was cramped. The seat was hard plastic. He slammed the door, silencing the shouts of the crowd. Dr. Vance sat up straight despite her hands being bound behind her. She took a deep breath. She closed her eyes for a second, visualizing the statutes she would use to dismantle this man's life. When she opened them, her eyes were dry and cold. Thorne climbed into the driver's seat, breathing heavy. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch, this is Agent Thorne. I have one female subject in custody. 18 U.S.C. 912 impersonating an officer. Also suspect 18 U.S.C. 2312 stolen vehicles. Transporting to field office now." "Copy, Agent Thorne. Status of subject." "Combative but secured," Thorne lied. Dr. Vance heard the lie. She memorized the time. 11:28 a.m. The drive to the Fairfax ICE field office took 30 minutes. It was a silent, suffocating journey. Thorne didn't speak. He turned on the radio to a talk station, turning the volume up as if to drown out the reality of what he had just done. He was running on adrenaline, rehearsing his report in his head. Subject was evasive, presented high-quality forged documents, attempted to flee. He was editing the truth in real time to fit his actions. In the back seat, Dr. Elena Vance sat in silence. She was in pain. The handcuffs were cutting into her radial nerve, causing her thumbs to go numb. But she did not ask him to loosen them again. She wanted the marks. She wanted the bruising. Every minute those cuffs remained on was another zero on the settlement check, another nail in the coffin of his career. She mentally catalogued the procedural errors. Failure to articulate reasonable suspicion. Failure to verify federal credentials. Excessive force on a compliant subject. Denial of due process. Racial profiling. She looked at the back of Thorne's head. She saw a man who was dangerous not because he was evil, but because he was mediocre and empowered. He was a man who had been told his instincts were law. "Agent," Vance said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. "Shut up back there," Thorne snapped, glancing in the rearview mirror. "I want to make sure you understand the gravity of your situation," she continued. "You are transporting a DOJ senior advisor in handcuffs. When we arrive, you are going to be met by your special agent in charge. Do you know Director Holloway?" Thorne hesitated. He did know Director Holloway. The man was a legend in the agency, a strict disciplinarian who ran the field office with military precision. "I know him," Thorne grunted. "He'll be glad to see I took a fraud off the street." "Director Holloway and I worked on the task force for institutional integrity in 2018, Vance said. "We have dinner together twice a year. His wife's name is Margaret. They have a golden retriever named Buster." Thorne's hands tightened on the steering wheel. A seed of doubt, cold and sharp, finally pierced his delusion. The details were too specific. A fraud might know the director's name, but the dog. The wife. "You can save your stories for the interrogation room," Thorne said, but his voice lacked the earlier conviction. He drove faster. They arrived at the field office at 12:05 p.m. It was a nondescript brick building surrounded by high fences. Thorne swiped his badge at the gate and pulled into the secure sally port. The garage door rolled down behind them, sealing them in. He got out and opened the back door. "Out!" Vance stepped out, her legs stiff. She stood tall despite the disheveled state of her suit. Thorne grabbed her arm again, leading her toward the intake processing door. He was hoping to hand her off to a booking officer, quickly write his report, and go home. He wanted to be done with this. But as they walked through the double doors into the main hallway of the processing center, fate intervened. It was a Sunday, usually quiet, but there was a multi-agency briefing happening in the conference room. The door to the conference room opened just as Thorne was marching Vance down the hall. Stepping out into the hallway was Deputy Director Holloway, holding a cup of coffee and talking to a U.S. Marshal. Holloway looked up. He saw Agent Thorne. Then he saw the woman in handcuffs. Holloway stopped mid-sentence. His coffee cup tilted, spilling brown liquid onto the linoleum. "Elena," Holloway said, his voice a mixture of confusion and horror. The hallway went dead silent, the kind of silence that happens right after a gunshot. Agent Thorne stopped, his hand still gripping Dr. Vance's arm. He looked at his boss. He looked at the prisoner. "Director," Thorne started, his voice cracking slightly. "I have a suspect here, impersonating a federal officer, stolen vehicle. She resisted." Holloway didn't even look at Thorne. He was staring at Dr. Vance, his face draining of color. He walked forward, closing the distance in 3 long strides. "Elena," Holloway repeated, his eyes scanning the handcuffs, the torn sleeve of her jacket, the bruising on her wrists. "My God, what is happening?" "Hello, Robert," Dr. Vance said, her voice cool and detached. "Your agent here seems to be under the impression that I am a car thief with a forged DOJ commission. He arrested me at St. Jude's, in front of the congregation." Holloway turned to Thorne. The look on his face was terrifying. It wasn't anger. It was the cold, calculating look of a man watching a train wreck and calculating the casualties. "Thorne," Holloway said, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you know who this is?" "She claims to be DOJ, sir," Thorne stammered. "But her ID looked fake. She was loitering near a Mercedes. The profile fit." "The profile?" Holloway's voice rose to a shout. "This is Dr. Elena Vance. She is the senior advisor to the Assistant Attorney General. She wrote the damn manual on civil rights enforcement that you are supposed to have read." Thorne felt the floor drop out from under him. The world spun. The dog. The wife. It was all real. He had arrested one of the highest-ranking civil rights officials in the country. "Sir, she didn't—" "Uncuff her," Holloway commanded. "Now." Thorne fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the key into the slot. He dropped the keys on the floor. Clatter. Holloway shoved Thorne aside violently. "Get away from her!" The director picked up the keys himself. He moved behind Dr. Vance. "Elena, I am so sorry. I am so sorry." He unlocked the cuffs. They clicked open. Dr. Vance brought her hands forward. Her wrists were encircled with deep, angry red welts. The skin was broken in 2 places. She rubbed her wrists slowly, looking at Thorne. "Agent Thorne," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You refused to verify my credentials. You refused to listen to witnesses. You used force on a compliant subject. And you did it all because you saw a black woman and a nice car and decided that was a crime." Thorne was backed against the wall. He looked small now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his future evaporate. "I was just doing my job," he whispered, the excuse sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "No," Holloway said, turning on him. "You were doing the exact opposite of your job. You just arrested a federal advisor on a hunch. You profiled her. Give me your weapon." The stripping of an officer's authority is a visceral thing. It is a dismantling of identity. Holloway held out his hand. "Gun, badge, ID now." Thorne unholstered his weapon slowly. He handed it over handle first. Holloway passed it to the U.S. Marshal standing nearby. "Badge!" Holloway barked. Thorne unclipped the badge from his neck chain. The metal felt heavy. He placed it in Holloway's hand. "Credentials." Thorne reached into his pocket and pulled out his ICE identification. Then he remembered. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out Dr. Vance's DOJ credentials. He held them out. The gold foil of the DOJ seal caught the fluorescent light. It was real. It had always been real. Holloway snatched the DOJ credentials and handed them gently to Dr. Vance. Then he took Thorne's ID. "Derek Thorne, you are placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending an investigation which I assure you will be swift," Holloway said. "You are to leave this building. You are not to speak to anyone. You are not to identify yourself as a federal agent. Escort him out." 2 other agents appeared. They flanked Thorne. They didn't look at him with sympathy. They looked at him with disgust. He was the guy who messed up so bad he took everyone down with him. As Thorne was marched toward the door, he looked back at Dr. Vance. She was checking her phone, already making the call that would bring the wrath of Washington down on this office. She didn't look back at him. He didn't exist to her anymore. He was just a defendant in a lawsuit. Dr. Vance looked at Holloway. "Robert, I want the logs. I want the dispatch recording. I want his personnel file. And I want a medical examiner to photograph these wrists." "You'll have everything, Elena," Holloway said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We can handle this internally." Vance laughed. It was a sharp, humorless sound. "Internally, Robert, this isn't an internal matter. This is a national news story. This is a civil rights violation of the highest order. If this happened to me with my badge and my position, what has he done to people who have no voice? I'm not just coming for him. I'm coming for the supervisors who let him stay on the street with a bias record. Holloway went pale. He knew she was right. Within 2 hours, the video from the church parking lot hit social media. The hashtag arresting while black was trending #1 globally. The image of Dr. Vance, dignified in her pearls, being manhandled by Agent Thorne was on every news channel. The headline on CNN read, "Top DOJ advisor, arrested by ICE agent for leaving church." The White House press secretary was asked about it during the Sunday briefing. The answer was short, "The president is aware and is outraged." The fallout was total. The investigation Dr. Vance demanded didn't just look at that Sunday. It looked at Thorne's entire 9-year career. It found a pattern that was undeniable. 17 stops of suspicious persons in affluent areas. All 17 were people of color. 0 convictions. 0 actual crimes. Just harassment masked as police work. Thorne was fired 3 weeks later. But he didn't just lose his job. He was charged federally with deprivation of rights under color of law. He pleaded guilty to avoid prison time, accepting a permanent ban from any law enforcement or security employment and 3 years of probation. At 34, his career was dead. He moved back to his parents' house in Ohio, unemployable, in his field, a pariah. Martha Reynolds, the neighbor who made the call, faced her own reckoning. She wasn't charged with a crime. Being biased isn't technically illegal in that context, but the social court was ruthless. Her name was leaked. She was fired from her job at a real estate firm for violating their inclusion values. She sold her townhome and moved away, unable to show her face at St. Jude's again. The lawsuit was swift. The Department of Homeland Security didn't want this to go to trial. The optics were impossible to defend. They settled with Dr. Elena Vance for $6.5 million. But Dr. Vance didn't keep the money. She used it to establish the Vance Initiative for Constitutional Policing, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal defense for citizens wrongly detained by immigration authorities. She turned her trauma into a war chest. 6 months later, Dr. Vance stood at a podium in Georgetown. She was accepting the Champion of Justice award. Her wrist still ached when it rained nerve damage that would never fully heal. She looked out at the crowd of law students, agents, and activists. "We like to believe that credentials protect us," she said, her voice echoing in the hall. "We think that if we dress right, speak right, and have the right job, we are safe. But I learned on a Sunday morning that to a biased mind, my badge was a fake, my car was stolen, and my existence was a crime. Justice isn't about how high you climb. It's about ensuring the system works for the person standing on the lowest rung. Because if they can come for me, they can certainly come for you." The room was silent. This story is a reminder that prestige is not a shield against prejudice. Derek Thorne destroyed his own life because he couldn't see past the color of a woman's skin. He lost his pension, his reputation, and his purpose because he trusted his bias over the evidence. But the real tragedy isn't what happened to Dr. Vance. She had the power to fight back. The tragedy is thinking about how many people Derek Thorne stopped who didn't have a DOJ badge. How many lives did he ruin before he picked the wrong victim? We have to ask ourselves, why did it take a DOJ advisor to expose this agent? Why weren't the previous complaints enough? If you think officers should carry personal liability insurance for civil rights violations so the taxpayers don't foot the $6.5 million bill, let me know in the comments. And do you think Martha Reynolds should have faced criminal charges for her 911 call? Thank you for watching. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never stop demanding the truth.
You live here? Because you're standing around like you don't belong.
I'm waiting on a secure courier. You have zero cause to interrogate me in my own building.
Immigration operation. Show me proof of status or you're coming with me.
Cuff me if you want, but the 4K cameras in this lobby are about to end your career.
The lobby security camera at the Vantage Point Luxury Apartments in Arlington, Virginia, captured the incident in high-definition 4K resolution, preserving every pixel of the injustice that was about to unfold. At 10:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, the sunlight was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, illuminating the polished marble floors and the contemporary art on the walls. Standing near the concierge desk was Marcus Thorne. At 56 years old, Thorne was a man who exuded a quiet, heavy kind of gravity. He was dressed in a charcoal bespoke suit that cost more than most people's first cars. His posture upright, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He was checking his watch, waiting for a secure courier to deliver hard drives containing encrypted architectural schematics for a Department of Defense server farm. Marcus wasn't just a resident, he was a federal contractor with top-secret/SCI clearance, a man whose biometrics could open doors in the Pentagon that most generals couldn't access. He had spent 30 years building the digital fortresses that protected American intelligence. But to Officer Kyle Vane, who had just parked his unmarked SUV in the fire lane outside Marcus Thorne, was nothing more than a suspect waiting to be caught. Officer Vane pushed through the revolving glass doors with the swagger of a man who believed his badge granted him ownership of the space he occupied. He was 32 years old with a high and tight haircut and a tactical vest that looked too clean to have seen much action. He had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, specifically the Enforcement and Removal Operations Unit, for 4 years. He was on a saturation patrol in the area, a tactic often used to flush out visa overstays. But Vane had a habit of freestyling. He scanned the lobby, his eyes glossing over the elderly white woman walking her poodle and the young couple chatting by the elevators. His gaze locked onto Marcus. In Vane's mind, the calculus was simple and prejudiced. A black man standing idle in a lobby where the rent started at $4,000 a month didn't fit the demographic profile he had constructed in his head. There was no report of a disturbance. There was no warrant. There was just a man in a suit standing still and an officer who needed to assert dominance. Vane adjusted his belt, shifting the weight of his firearm, and walked straight toward Marcus. The concierge, a young man named Elias, looked up with a start, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Elias knew Mr. Thorne well. He knew he tipped generously at Christmas and never complained about package deliveries. But Elias froze, intimidated by the uniform and the aggressive stride of the federal agent. Marcus saw the officer approaching in his peripheral vision. He didn't turn fully. He simply angled his head, acknowledging the presence without surrendering his ground. He had been black in America for over 5 decades. He knew exactly what was happening before a word was spoken. He kept his face impassive, his heart rate steady. He had negotiated contracts worth billions. He wasn't going to be rattled by a beat cop with a chip on his shoulder. "Excuse me, partner," Vane said, his voice loud enough to echo slightly in the cavernous space. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't introduce himself. "You live in this building." Marcus turned slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. He looked Vane up and down, noting the nameplate, the lack of a body camera, and the aggressive stance. "I'm waiting for a delivery, officer. Can I help you with something?" Vane didn't like the non-answer. He stepped into Marcus's personal space, a classic intimidation tactic taught in the academy to provoke a reaction. "I asked you a simple question. Do you live here? We've had reports of people loitering in these lobbies, scouting for burglaries. You look like you're waiting for something, all right." Marcus maintained eye contact. "I am waiting for a courier. And unless you have a specific, articulable suspicion that I've committed a crime, I'm under no obligation to provide you with my personal address or my itinerary." The air in the lobby seemed to be sucked out of the room. Vane blinked his face, flushing a light shade of pink. He wasn't used to pushback. He was used to fear. He was used to people fumbling for their wallets, apologizing, begging not to be taken away. He wasn't used to a man in a suit citing legal standards with the dryness of a law professor. "Look," Vane said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more menacing. "This is an immigration enforcement operation. I have the authority to determine the status of individuals I suspect might be in the country illegally. Now you're acting evasive. That gives me reasonable suspicion. So I'm going to ask you again. Do you live here, and do you have identification proving your citizenship? It was a leap of logic so profound it was almost impressive in its absurdity. Vane had taken a well-dressed man speaking perfect English and twisted it into an immigration investigation solely to save face. Marcus shifted his weight, planting his feet firmly. He knew the statutes. He knew United States versus Brignoni Ponce. He knew that looking out of place was not a legal basis for a stop. "Officer Vane," Marcus said, reading the name tag clearly. "You are making a significant error. I am a United States citizen. I am standing in the lobby of my own residence. Your assertion that my refusal to answer unwarranted questions constitutes reasonable suspicion is legally distinct from probable cause. You are currently detaining me without a valid basis. I suggest you walk away." Vane scoffed a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "You think you're a lawyer. You think a suit makes you untouchable." Vane's hand hovered near his cuffs. "I'm done asking. You're failing to comply with a federal agent. I'm detaining you for obstruction and for investigation of immigration status. Turn around." "I am not resisting," Marcus said clearly. His voice projected for the benefit of the concierge and the security camera. "But I am not consenting to this interaction. I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights." Vane grabbed Marcus's arm. The grip was tight, unnecessary. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He knew that any physical reaction, no matter how natural, would be used to justify force. "Turn around!" Vane barked, spinning Marcus toward the concierge desk. The elderly woman with the poodle gasped and hurriedly pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she hit record. Vane saw the phone, but didn't care. He was too deep in the tunnel vision of his own authority. He pulled Marcus's wrists behind his back. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut, one, then two. Marcus Thorne, a man who had briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was now shackled in his own home by a man who didn't understand the magnitude of the mistake he was making. "You're making a mistake that will end your career," Marcus said quietly, his face pressed against the cool marble of the concierge desk where Vane had pushed him. "Check my wallet. The identification is in the left breast pocket." Vane laughed, a nervous, adrenaline-fueled sound. "Yeah, I'll check it. I bet I find a fake green card or some printed-out ID from a terrifyingly good mill. You guys always have the same story." Vane reached into Marcus's suit jacket, roughly patting him down. He pulled out a slim, black leather wallet. He opened it, expecting to find a foreign passport or a shoddy state ID. Instead, he saw a standard Virginia driver's license, and behind it a white card with a gold chip, a holographic overlay, and a blue strip across the top. It was a Department of Defense Common Access Card, CAC. But not just a standard contractor card. This one had specific coding on the back markings that indicated high-level access. Vane looked at the card, then at Marcus, then back at the card. The cognitive dissonance was hitting him hard. His brain refused to accept that the man he had profiled as a loiterer was actually a high-level federal asset. "Nice try," Vane sneered, covering his own doubt with bravado. "I've seen these before. You can buy these on the dark web for $500. High-quality laminate, but the chips never work." He shoved the wallet into his tactical vest pocket. "We'll see how real it is when we run it at the station. Let's go." Marcus didn't struggle as Vane marched him toward the door. He simply made eye contact with the woman filming. "Please send that video to the cloud immediately," he said to her. "Don't stop recording." Vane shoved Marcus forward. "Shut up. You're in custody." The ride to the Department of Homeland Security field office in Fairfax took 40 minutes. Vane drove with the radio off the silence in the car, thick and oppressive. In the rearview mirror, he kept glancing at Marcus, waiting for the crack in the facade, waiting for the plea, the confession that he was actually overstaying a visa or had a warrant in another state. But Marcus just sat there, staring out the window, his mind working like the engineer he was. He was cataloging every traffic violation Vane made, failure to signal speeding without lights and sirens, aggressive lane changes. He was memorizing the timeline. He was preparing the mental dossier that his lawyers would need. Vane, conversely, was starting to sweat. The adrenaline was fading, and the nagging voice in the back of his head was getting louder. The suit was really nice. The leather of the wallet was genuine. The neighbor didn't look scared of him. She looked scared for him. When they arrived at the processing center, Vane pulled Marcus out of the car with performative roughness, parading him past the front desk where 2 other agents were drinking coffee. "Got a live one," Vane announced, trying to garner approval. "Refused to ID belligerent, possessed a forged federal credential." The other agents looked at Marcus, dignified, calm, expensive suit, rumpled but not disheveled, and exchanged a glance. They didn't say anything, but the atmosphere shifted. Vane took Marcus to a holding cell, uncuffed one hand to secure him to the bench, and then walked over to the processing station. He took the forged CAC card out of his pocket and tossed it onto the desk of the intake officer, a young woman named Hernandez. "Log that as evidence. Forgery. I'm going to start the booking sheet." Hernandez picked up the card. She felt the weight of it. She looked at the chip. She had processed thousands of fake IDs. They usually felt like plastic credit cards. This felt like government property. "Vane," Hernandez said, her voice hesitant. "You might want to hold on a second. This looks legit." Vane waved her off from across the room where he was typing on a computer. "It's a good fake. Just scan it. It won't read." Hernandez shrugged and slid the card into the smart card reader attached to the secure DHS network. She expected an error message or a "card not recognized" prompt. Instead, her screen flickered, went black for a second, and then flashed a bright red banner that locked her terminal. A silent alarm triggered in the system. The text on the screen didn't say error. It said, "Alert Level 5, asset detected. Unauthorized access attempt. Security Protocol Alpha 9 initiated. Notify Watch Commander immediately." Hernandez's face went pale. She stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "Vane," she whispered, then louder. "Vane, what did you do?" In the corner office, Assistant Field Office Director Sarah Miller was reviewing budget reports when her phone rang the red phone. It was the Pentagon's automated security liaison. Her eyes widened as she listened to the synthesized voice. She hung up and sprinted out of her office down the hallway, bursting into the processing area. She saw Hernandez standing away from her locked computer, and Vane typing up his report. "Who ran the card?" Miller screamed, her voice cracking with the intensity of the panic. "Who brought in the carrier of the card, ending in 8942? Vane looked up, confused. "I did, Director. It's a forgery I confiscated off a suspect in Arlington. I was just—" Miller was in his face in 2 seconds. "You idiot! You absolute colossal idiot! That is not a forgery. That is a live DOD credential with Yankee White proximity clearance. Where is the man?" Vane pointed toward the holding cell, his hand trembling slightly. He's in cell 2. But ma'am, he was loitering. He wouldn't answer my questions." Miller didn't listen. She ran to the cell. She saw Marcus Thorne sitting on the bench, his wrist cuffed to the bar. She signaled to the guard. "Open it, now." The guard fumbled with the keys and swung the door open. Miller walked in her demeanor completely different from the fire she had shown Vane. She was professional, apologetic, and terrified. "Mr. Thorne," she said, recognizing the name from the alert. "I am Director Miller. I need to apologize profusely. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Please let me remove those." She unlocked the handcuff herself. Marcus rubbed his wrist slowly. He stood up and looked Miller in the eye. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Director." Marcus said, his voice ice cold. "It was a profiling incident." "And your agent has compromised the security of a classified architectural timeline by detaining me and seizing my credentials. I need my phone. I need to call the General Counsel at the Pentagon." Miller turned to Vane, who was now standing by the door looking like a ghost. "Give him his property. Everything. Now." Vane handed over the wallet, the phone, the watch. Marcus checked his phone. "I missed the courier," he said. "Do you have any idea how much that delay costs the taxpayers, Officer Vane?" Vane couldn't speak. He just shook his head. Marcus turned to Miller. "I am leaving. I am not signing anything. I am not answering any questions. You will preserve all video footage from the lobby, the transport vehicle, and this facility. If a single second of footage is corrupted or lost, I will add spoliation of evidence to the federal lawsuit I am filing before the sun goes down." He straightened his tie, brushed invisible dust off his lapel, and walked out of the station. Miller watched him go, then turned slowly to Vane. "Badge and gun," she said softly. "On my desk. You're done." Marcus didn't go home. He went straight to the offices of Sterling and Cho, a premier civil rights and constitutional law firm in D.C. By the time he sat down in the conference room, the video from the neighbor had already hit the internet. It was titled, "ICE Agent Arrests DOD Contractor in Luxury Lobby." It had 4 million views in 3 hours. The visual was striking the calm, well-dressed black man being manhandled by the younger, aggressive white officer. The lawsuit was filed the next morning. Thorne versus Vane et al. It alleged false imprisonment, assault, battery violation of the Fourth Amendment, violation of the Fifth Amendment, and racially motivated profiling. The discovery process was brutal. Marcus's lawyers demanded Vane's text messages and emails for the last 2 years. The government tried to block it, citing privacy, but the judge, a strict constitutionalist who hated sloppy police work, ordered the release. The texts were damning. Vane had a group chat with 3 other officers where they bragged about hunting expeditions in wealthy neighborhoods. They shared photos of minority men driving nice cars with captions like, "drug money" or "crypto scam." It wasn't just implicit bias. It was explicit documented targeting. They found that Vane had stopped 18 other black men in the last year under similar suspicious person pretenses, but none of them had the resources or the federal connections to fight back. They had just taken the harassment and moved on. Marcus Thorne was the wall Vane had finally crashed into. The Department of Justice attorneys looked at the evidence, looked at the texts, and looked at the viral video which was now being discussed on every major news network. They realized they couldn't go to trial. A trial would require Marcus to testify, which would bring up his work, his clearance, and the government's own security protocols. And it would put Vane's racism on public display for weeks. The settlement conference took place 6 months later. The government lawyers looked exhausted. Marcus sat across from them looking exactly as he had in the lobby, unflappable. They started with a low offer. Marcus's lawyer didn't even look up from his papers. "Mr. Thorne's reputation has been damaged. His security clearance was suspended for 3 weeks pending an investigation costing him valuable contract time, and his constitutional rights were trampled. We are starting at $6 million. The negotiation lasted 3 days. In the end, they settled for $5.2 million. It was one of the largest individual settlements for an unlawful detention in the agency's history. But the money came with conditions from Marcus's side, a public admission of wrongdoing by the agency, and the permanent revocation of Kyle Vane's law enforcement certification. They agreed. Officer Kyle Vane was not just fired. He was decertified. His name was added to the National Decertification Index, ensuring he could never work as a police officer, a federal agent, or even an armed security guard anywhere in the United States. The last report of him was that he was working construction in Ohio, living in his brother's basement. He had lost his pension, his career, and his standing, all because he couldn't imagine a world where a black man in a suit belonged in a lobby that nice. Marcus Thorne took the $5.2 million and established a legal defense fund for federal contractors and employees of color who faced discrimination. He returned to his work securing the nation's secrets, but he never looked at a police car the same way again. The tragedy of this story isn't just what happened to Marcus Thorne. It's that for every Marcus Thorne, there are 1,000 others who don't have the Yankee White clearance or the high-powered legal team. There are thousands who get handcuffed, processed, and humiliated, and then just have to live with the trauma because the system is designed to protect the badge, not the citizen. Marcus won because he was exceptional, but justice shouldn't require you to be exceptional. It should be the standard. It should be the baseline. When we allow authority to go unchecked, when we allow gut feelings to override the Constitution, we endanger everyone. Liberty is fragile. It can be snatched away in a lobby on a Tuesday morning by a man who thinks he knows who you are just by looking at you. What do you think was the biggest mistake Officer Vane made? Was it the profiling, or was it the arrogance of ignoring the evidence right in front of him? And do you think a $5, $2 million settlement is enough to punish a system that allows this to happen? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please share this story. We need to keep shining a light on these injustices until they stop happening.